The dust-laden wind carried the sound of sobbing across the barren yard as Tabitha Brooks clutched a crumpled telegram to her chest, her knuckles white with strain. The year was 1874, and the telegram that had arrived in the remote town of Tucumcari, New Mexico Territory, had shattered what little remained of her world. Her husband of 12 years was dead, killed in a mining accident near Santa Fe, leaving her alone with 6 children and a homestead that was slowly crumbling around them. "Mama," the small voice of her youngest, 4-year-old Lily, broke through Tabitha's grief. The child's face was smudged with dirt, her dress patched in multiple places, but her eyes held the same innocent trust they always had. "Why are you crying, Mama?" Tabitha quickly wiped her tears and forced a smile. "It's nothing, sweet pea. Just the wind making my eyes water." She couldn't tell them yet, not until she had figured out what they were going to do. The homestead sat on the outskirts of Tucumcari, a small but growing settlement along the Goodnight-loving trail. What had once been a promising start with fertile soil and a steady stream nearby had deteriorated over the years as drought gripped the territory. The crops had failed for the 2nd year running, and with William gone, there would be no money coming in from his work at the mines. Tabitha gathered her children for supper that evening: 12-year-old James, 10-year-old twins Emma and Elizabeth, 7-year-old Samuel, 6-year-old Henry, and little Lily. They sat around the wooden table that William had built when they first arrived in Tucumcari, their faces expectant as Tabitha served up the meager stew she'd managed to stretch with the last of their potatoes. "Where's Pa?" James asked, his young face already showing signs of the man he would become. "Shouldn't he be back by now?" Tabitha's hands trembled as she set down the pot. "Children," she began, her voice catching, "I have something to tell you." The news fell upon them like a heavy blanket. The older children understood immediately, their faces crumpling in grief. Little Lily and Henry didn't fully comprehend what had happened, but sensed the change that had come over their family. That night, Tabitha held them all as they cried themselves to sleep, wondering how she would manage to keep them all fed and clothed without William. The following weeks were a blur of grief and desperate calculations. Tabitha sold what few valuables they had: her mother's silver hairbrush, William's pocket watch, the good china they'd carried all the way from Virginia. The money wouldn't last long, not with 7 mouths to feed. When the bank sent a representative to inform her that they would be foreclosing on the property if the mortgage wasn't paid within 30 days, Tabitha knew she had to find work. But jobs for women in Tucumcari were scarce, especially for a woman with 6 children in tow. "I can't take on a woman with all those kids," Mrs. Peterson at the general store told her apologetically. "You wouldn't be able to focus on the work." The hotel owner had been equally dismissive. "6 children? Lord have mercy, no. I need someone who can be here from dawn till dusk." Even the schoolteacher had shaken her head. "I wish I could help, Mrs. Brooks, but the school board is very particular about hiring only unmarried women without family obligations." By the end of the week, Tabitha had been turned away from every business in town. She sat on the edge of her bed that night, a letter half written to her cousin in St. Louis, wondering if they would take them in, at least until she could find work in the city. "No one wants a woman with 6 children, she sighed, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "I want all 7 of you." The deep voice from the doorway startled her. Tabitha jumped to her feet, reaching for the rifle that stood propped against the wall, only to find herself face to face with Thomas Blackwell, the owner of the largest cattle ranch in the county. "Mr. Blackwell, what are you doing in my house?" she demanded, her heart hammering in her chest. The tall man removed his hat, revealing a shock of dark hair streaked with silver at the temples. His face was weathered from years under the New Mexico sun, but his eyes were kind beneath the stern brow. "Apologies for the intrusion, Mrs. Brooks," he said. "Your door was open, and I knocked, but no one answered." Tabitha realized belatedly that in her distraction, she'd left the door unlatched. A dangerous oversight in these parts. "That doesn't explain why you're here, Mr. Blackwell. I heard about your husband," he said, his voice softening. "And I've seen you making the rounds in town, looking for work." Shame burned Tabitha's cheeks. Had everyone been watching her desperate attempts to find employment? "I don't need your pity, sir. It's not pity I'm offering." He stepped further into the room, his spurs jingling softly against the wooden floorboards. I need a housekeeper at the ranch. The place hasn't been properly managed since Mrs. Hodges left to care for her ailing sister in Kansas. There's a cottage on the property, nothing fancy, but it's sound, with 3 bedrooms. Plenty of space for you and your children. Tabitha stared at him, disbelieving. You'd hire me? With all my children? I've got 20 hands on that ranch who need feeding and looking after. Your children could be a help, not a hindrance. The older boys could learn ranching skills, and the girls could assist with household duties. As for the little ones, he smiled slightly. Well, the place could use some laughter. It seemed too good to be true. Tabitha narrowed her eyes. What's the catch, Mr. Blackwell? No catch. Fair wages, room, and board for all of you. The cottage is sitting empty, and I need someone to run the house. He replaced his hat. Think about it. I'll be heading back to the ranch tomorrow afternoon. If you decide to accept, be ready with your belongings by noon. After he left, Tabitha sat for a long time, considering the offer. She had heard about the Blackwell ranch. It was prosperous, well managed, and Thomas Blackwell had a reputation for being fair, if somewhat reserved. It wasn't ideal, uprooting her children from the only home they'd known in New Mexico, but what choice did she have? The next morning, she told the children about Mr. Blackwell's offer. We're going to live on a ranch, Samuel asked, his eyes lighting up. With real cowboys and horses? Yes, Tabitha nodded. But it's not a game. We'll all have to work hard. Will we have to leave Pa? Lily asked, her lower lip trembling. Tabitha gathered her youngest into her arms. Pa will always be with us in our hearts, sweetheart, and we can visit his grave whenever we want to. By noon, they had packed their meager belongings into the wagon that Mr. Blackwell had sent for them. Tabitha took one last look at the homestead where she and William had planned to build a future together before climbing up beside the ranch hand who'd been sent to drive them. The Blackwell Ranch was larger than Tabitha had imagined, sprawling across thousands of acres of grassland with the Sangre de Cristo Mountains rising in the distance. The main house was an impressive 2-story structure built of stone and timber, with a wide veranda wrapping around the front. Several outbuildings clustered nearby: a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, a cookhouse, stables, and various barns and storehouses. The cottage that was to be their new home sat a short distance from the main house, a solid, if plain, structure with a small porch and a vegetable garden that had seen better days. It's not much, Thomas Blackwell said as he showed them inside, but it's yours for as long as you work for me. The interior was simple but well built, with a central living area containing a stone fireplace, a kitchen with a decent cook stove, and 3 bedrooms as promised. The furniture was sturdy if sparse: beds with fresh mattresses, a dining table with chairs, a few dressers and cupboards. It's more than enough, Tabitha assured him, already mentally arranging their belongings to make the space feel like home. I'll leave you to get settled. Supper's at 6 in the main house. I've told Mrs. Garrison she's been cooking since Mrs. Hodges left that you'll be taking over household duties starting tomorrow. With a nod, he turned to go. Mr. Blackwell, Tabitha called after him. Thank you for giving us this chance. He paused in the doorway, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat. Everyone deserves a chance, Mrs. Brooks, even a woman with 6 children. With that, he was gone, striding back toward the main house. The children explored their new home with excitement, claiming beds and closet space, marveling at the pump that brought water right into the kitchen rather than requiring a trip to the well. That evening, they made their way to the main house for supper, the children freshly washed and in their best clothes, which were still worn thin in places. The dining room was impressive, with a long table that could seat 20, though only Thomas Blackwell sat at its head. Mr. Blackwell likes to eat with the family, explained Mrs. Garrison, a stout woman with gray-streaked hair pulled into a severe bun. The hands eat at the cookhouse. The meal was simple but plentiful: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. The children, unused to such abundance after months of carefully rationed meals, ate with enthusiasm, remembering their manners only after pointed looks from their mother. Thomas Blackwell watched them with what seemed like amusement, answering Samuel's eager questions about ranch life with patience, complimenting the twins on their matching braids, and even coaxing a smile from shy little Lily. You have fine children, Mrs. Brooks, he said as they finished the meal. They do you credit. Thank you, Mr. Blackwell. They're good kids. They've been through a lot. As have you, I imagine. His eyes met hers across the table, and Tabitha was startled by the understanding she saw there. Losing a husband is no small thing. No, she agreed softly. It's not. The following weeks fell into a pattern. Tabitha rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for the household, managed the cleaning and laundry with help from Emma and Elizabeth, planned meals, oversaw the kitchen garden, and generally kept the main house running smoothly. James and Samuel, when not helping their mother, shadowed the ranch hands, learning about cattle and horses, while Henry divided his time between helping his brothers and playing with Lily, who had become a favorite among the cowhands with her sunny disposition and fearless nature. Thomas Blackwell was often away, riding out with the hands to check on the herds or traveling to nearby towns on business. But when he was home, Tabitha noticed how he would watch her children with a thoughtful expression, how he always had time to listen to their stories or answer their questions, despite the demands of running a large ranch. One evening, nearly a month after they had come to the ranch, Tabitha found him sitting alone on the veranda, a glass of whiskey in hand, staring out at the darkening landscape. "May I join you, Mr. Blackwell?" she asked, hesitating at the door. He looked up, surprised, then nodded. "Of course." Tabitha settled into the chair beside him, smoothing her skirts. "I wanted to thank you again for giving us this opportunity. The children are thriving here." "I'm glad to hear it." He took a sip of his whiskey. "They're good kids. James has a real way with horses. Foreman says he might make a fine wrangler someday." Pride swelled in Tabitha's chest. "He's always loved animals. Takes after his father that way." A pang of grief accompanied the words, softer now but still present. "You miss him?" It wasn't a question. "Every day," Tabitha admitted. "But it's getting easier to remember the good times without feeling like I'm being torn apart inside." Thomas nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Time helps, but it never completely heals that kind of wound." The way he said it made Tabitha wonder. "You speak from experience." He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "My wife, Caroline, died in childbirth 7 years ago. Our son with her." "I'm so sorry," Tabitha whispered, her heart aching for his loss. "I didn't know. Not many do. I don't talk about it much." He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "That's why this place has been so empty. Caroline was the heart of it. After she died, I threw myself into building the ranch, making it successful. But a house needs more than just a man rattling around in it to be a home." The confession hung in the air between them, intimate in the gathering dusk. Tabitha felt a connection to this man. She hadn't expected the shared understanding of profound loss. "The children have brought life back to this place," Thomas continued after a moment. "I didn't realize how much I'd missed the sound of laughter, of footsteps running down the hallways. They can be quite a handful," Tabitha smiled. "A good handful." His lips curved slightly, the closest thing to a full smile she'd seen from him. "You've done well with them, especially on your own." "They're all I have left of William," she said softly. "I'd do anything for them." Thomas nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I can see that. It's what makes you remarkable, Mrs. Brooks." The compliment warmed her unexpectedly. "Tabitha, please. If we're going to be sharing confidences, I think you can use my given name." "Tabitha," he repeated, testing the sound of it. "Then you must call me Thomas." A comfortable silence settled between them as they watched the first stars appear in the darkening sky. For the first time since receiving that terrible telegram, Tabitha felt a sense of peace. The following days brought new developments. Thomas began joining them for meals more regularly, not just at supper, but sometimes at breakfast too, engaging with the children in ways he hadn't before. He took James and Samuel out riding with him, showing them how to check on the herds, how to mend fences, how to read the weather from the clouds. He brought back ribbons for the girls' hair from a trip to Santa Fe and a wooden horse he'd whittled himself for Henry. For Tabitha, there were more quiet conversations on the veranda in the evenings after the children had gone to bed. She learned that Thomas had come west from Boston as a young man, determined to build something of his own away from his father's shipping business. He'd met Caroline in Santa Fe, the daughter of a local merchant, and they'd built the ranch together from nothing more than a small cabin and a few hundred acres. In turn, Tabitha told him about growing up in Virginia, meeting William at a church social, and their decision to head west after the Civil War had devastated their homeland. She spoke of their early years in Tucumcari, the hope they'd had, the dreams that had slowly crumbled under the harsh realities of frontier life. "You're a strong woman," Thomas told her one evening. "Most would have given up long ago." "What choice did I have?" Tabitha asked. "They're my children. They depend on me. Many would have sent them to relatives, or worse, to orphanages. You kept them together, protected them. I couldn't bear to lose any more of my family," she admitted. "They're all pieces of my heart walking around outside my body." Thomas reached out then, hesitantly, and covered her hand with his. The touch was warm, comforting. "They're lucky to have you." The moment stretched between them, laden with unspoken possibilities. Then Thomas withdrew his hand, cleared his throat, and changed the subject to the weather and its impact on the upcoming cattle drive. But something had shifted between them. A door opened that couldn't be fully closed again. Summer gave way to autumn, bringing cooler temperatures and the golden hues of changing leaves to the cottonwoods along the creek that ran through the ranch. The cattle drive to the railhead in Las Vegas was successful, bringing a tidy profit that put Thomas in good spirits. One crisp October morning, he appeared at the cottage door with a proposal that took Tabitha by surprise. "I'd like to take you and the children into town today," he said. "There's a harvest festival, and I thought they might enjoy it." Tabitha hesitated. "That's very kind, but I have so much to do. I've already spoken to Mrs. Garrison. She's happy to handle things for the day." His eyes held a hint of amusement. "You've been working nonstop since you arrived, Tabitha. Surely you can spare one day for some enjoyment." Put that way, she could hardly refuse. The children were ecstatic at the prospect of a day in town, scrambling to don their best clothes while Tabitha fretted about their appearance. They had been at the ranch for nearly 4 months, but they still wore mostly the same clothes they'd arrived in, though Tabitha had done her best to keep them mended and clean. "They look fine," Thomas assured her as they climbed into the wagon he'd had harnessed for the outing. "And if they need anything new, well, that's what stores are for." The festival in Tucumcari was a lively affair, with bunting stretched across the main street, tables laden with food, games for the children, and a small band playing fiddle tunes for dancing. The Brooks children scattered like quail once given permission, Samuel and Henry racing to the pie-eating contest, the twins gravitating toward a group of girls their age, James lingering near the horse races, and Lily tugging Thomas toward a display of candied apples. Watching Thomas lift Lily onto his shoulders for a better view of the festivities, Tabitha felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the autumn sunshine. The sight of her youngest chattering happily to the tall rancher, her small hands gripping his hat for balance, stirred emotions Tabitha had thought long buried after William's death. "Your man seems mighty fond of your little one," observed an older woman standing nearby, a basket of apples in her arms. "Oh, he's not my," Tabitha began, then stopped. How could she explain what Thomas was to them? Not merely an employer, not quite a friend, certainly not her man. "He's been very kind to all of us," she finished lamely. The woman gave her a knowing look. "Kindness is a good foundation, dear. Better than passion that burns out at the first hardship." Before Tabitha could respond, Thomas was returning with Lily, who clutched a sticky candied apple with delight. "Mama, look what Mr. Thomas bought me." "I see, sweetheart. What do you say to Mr. Blackwell?" "Thank you." Lily beamed, then whispered loudly. "He says I can call him Thomas now. Can I, Mama? Please?" Thomas looked slightly abashed. "I hope that's all right," she asked, "and I didn't see the harm." "Of course," Tabitha assured him, touched by his consideration in checking with her. "If you're comfortable with it." The day passed in a whirl of activities. Thomas insisted on buying new clothes for all the children, sturdy boots for the boys, warm coats for winter, pretty dresses for the girls that made them twirl with delight. When Tabitha protested the expense, he waved away her concerns. "Consider it in advance on your wages," he said, though the gleam in his eye told her he had no intention of deducting anything from her pay. They ate lunch at the hotel dining room, a treat the children had never experienced, and afterwards, Thomas surprised them all by leading them to the photographer's studio at the end of town. "I thought you might like a family portrait," he explained. "Something to remember this day by." The photographer arranged them carefully, Tabitha seated in the center with Lily on her lap, the other children standing around her in their new clothes, faces scrubbed clean, and hair neatly combed. "And you, sir?" the photographer asked Thomas, who stood to the side. "Will you be in the portrait as well?" Thomas looked to Tabitha, uncertainty in his eyes. She found herself nodding, gesturing for him to join them. He positioned himself behind her chair, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder, the other on James's shoulder beside him. The touch was proper, respectable, yet Tabitha felt it like a brand through the fabric of her dress. "Perfect," declared the photographer, ducking beneath his black cloth. "Now hold very still." The resulting photograph, delivered to the ranch 2 weeks later, captured a moment of possibility, 7 faces looking toward a future none of them had anticipated 6 months earlier, with Thomas Blackwell standing tall and protective behind them all. As autumn deepened, the ranch prepared for winter. Tabitha found herself busier than ever, preserving the garden's bounty, preparing the house for colder weather, and helping Mrs. Garrison with the slaughtering and meat preservation that would see them through until spring. The children, too, had their roles. James was now spending most days with the ranch hands, learning the business from the ground up. The twins had proven themselves capable in the kitchen and with the household accounts. Samuel showed a talent for carpentry under the tutelage of Mr. Peterson, the ranch's handyman, while Henry had become the unofficial messenger between all parts of the ranch, running errands with boundless energy. Even little Lily had her tasks, feeding the chickens and gathering eggs each morning without fail. Thomas, observing their industry one evening as they all sat around the dining table in the main house, nodded with approval. "You've become quite the working family," he remarked. "I can hardly remember how we managed before you came." "Poorly, if Mrs. Garrison is to be believed," Tabitha replied with a smile. The older cook had become a friend and confidant over the months, sharing tales of the ranch's earlier days and offering sage advice about managing a large household. "Mrs. Garrison speaks nothing but the truth," Thomas agreed solemnly, though his eyes twinkled. "She tells me I was wasting away to a shadow before you arrived to feed me properly." "You were too thin," Tabitha acknowledged, remembering how gaunt he had seemed that first day at their homestead. "You filled out some since then." A hush fell over the table as both adults realized the intimacy of her observation. The children, oblivious to the undercurrents, continued eating and chattering, but Tabitha felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thanks to your excellent cooking," Thomas said finally, his voice gentle, "among your many other talents." The moment passed, but Tabitha found herself increasingly aware of Thomas's presence in the days that followed the sound of his boots in the hallway, the rumble of his voice as he gave instructions to the foreman, the way the corners of his eyes crinkled when he smiled at something one of the children said. It was foolishness, she told herself sternly. She was a widow with 6 children, dependent on his goodwill for their livelihood. Whatever growing feelings she might harbor were best kept firmly in check. And yet, there were moments when she caught him watching her with an expression that made her wonder if perhaps she wasn't alone in these unwelcome sentiments. The first snow came early that year, a swirling white curtain that transformed the ranch into a winter wonderland overnight. The children were delighted, tumbling out of the cottage in the morning to build snowmen and engage in snowball fights that left them red-cheeked and breathless. Tabitha was preparing lunch in the main house when Thomas strode in, snow-dusting his coat and hat. "The north pasture fence is down," he announced without preamble. "Peterson and I managed to get the cattle moved to the south section, but we'll need to repair it once this weather clears." "You're frozen through," Tabitha observed, noting how he rubbed his gloved hands together for warmth. "Sit by the fire. I'll bring you some hot coffee." He sank gratefully into the chair she indicated, removing his hat and coat. "Your boys are having quite the time out there," he commented as she handed him the steaming mug. "Samuel has quite an arm on him, nearly took my hat off with a snowball when I rode in." Tabitha gasped. "He didn't." "I'll speak to him." "Don't," Thomas interrupted, a rare full smile breaking across his face. "I haven't seen boys enjoying themselves so honestly in years." It did my heart good. Tabitha paused, struck by the transformation that smile wrought on his features. The stern lines eased, the ever-present gravity lifted, revealing the younger man beneath the responsible rancher's exterior. "You should smile more often," she said before she could stop herself. "It suits you." The words hung between them, too personal, too revealing. Thomas's eyes widened slightly, then softened as he held her gaze. "I find I have more reason to smile these days," he replied quietly. The moment was broken by the arrival of Mrs. Garrison, bustling in with her arms full of linens. Tabitha stepped back, murmuring something about checking on lunch, and retreated to the safety of the kitchen, her heart beating unnaturally fast. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Tabitha sat by the fire in the cottage, mending one of Henry's shirts. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, but the room was snug and warm. A knock at the door startled her. Few ventured out in such weather after nightfall. Opening the door, she found Thomas standing on the porch, a lantern in one hand and a parcel in the other. Snow swirled around him, settling on his hat and shoulders. "Thomas, what are you doing out in this storm?" "I wanted to bring this by," he said, holding out the parcel. "It arrived on today's mail coach, just before the snow started." Tabitha took the package, recognizing the handwriting immediately. "It's from my cousin in St. Louis, the one I was writing to when you offered us this position. I thought it might be important." He remained on the threshold, seemingly reluctant to impose further. "Come in, please. You're letting all the cold air in." Tabitha stepped back, gesturing him inside. Thomas stomped the snow from his boots and entered, removing his hat. He looked incongruously large in the small sitting room, his presence filling the space in a way that should have been intimidating but instead felt oddly comforting. Tabitha set the parcel on the table. "Would you like some tea? Or something stronger? I believe there's a bottle of Williams whiskey somewhere." "Tea would be fine, thank you." While Tabitha busied herself with the kettle, Thomas moved to warm himself by the fire. The domestic scene struck her forcibly. How natural it felt to have him in their home, how easily he fit into the space. It was a dangerous train of thought. "Your cousin," Thomas said as she handed him a cup of tea. "What news does she send?" Tabitha opened the parcel, finding a letter and a small package within. She unfolded the letter, scanning its contents quickly. "She was sorry to hear about William. She's invited us to come stay with them in St. Louis until we get on our feet." Something flickered across Thomas's face. Alarm? Dismay? He masked it quickly. "That's kind of her. Will you go?" The question hung in the air, weighted with unasked questions. Tabitha realized with sudden clarity that she had no desire to leave the ranch, to leave Thomas. But the realization brought with it a fresh wave of guilt. William had been gone less than a year, and already her heart was turning toward another man. I don't know," she answered honestly. "When I wrote to her, we were desperate. Now," she gestured around the cozy room, indicating the stability they had found. "You have options now," Thomas nodded, his expression unreadable. "That's good. Everyone should have choices." "Yes," Tabitha agreed softly, though the thought of leaving the ranch, leaving him, left her feeling hollow. The small package within the parcel contained a brooch that had belonged to Tabitha's mother, a simple silver piece with a small pearl in the center. "I thought this was lost," Tabitha murmured, running her finger over the smooth surface. "My cousin must have had it all this time." "It's beautiful," Thomas commented, setting down his empty cup. "Like its owner." The compliment, offered so simply, brought heat to Tabitha's cheeks. "Thomas, I should go," he said abruptly, reaching for his hat. "It's getting late, and the snow isn't letting up." Tabitha walked him to the door, confused by the sudden shift in his manner. "Thank you for bringing the package. It was thoughtful of you." Thomas paused on the threshold, snow already accumulating on his broad shoulders. "Tabitha," he began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with his words. "Whatever you decide about your cousin's offer, know that you and the children will always have a place here, for as long as you want it." Before she could respond, he was gone, striding through the snow toward the main house, his lantern a bobbing point of light in the swirling white. Tabitha closed the door slowly, her mind awhirl with conflicting emotions. She had no intention of accepting her cousin's invitation, not now, when they had found a measure of security and happiness at the ranch. But Thomas's reaction to the letter, and his parting words, suggested he believed they might leave. The thought that he might care whether they stayed or left kindled a warmth inside her that had little to do with the fire crackling in the grate. The snowstorm lasted 3 days, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. When it finally cleared, the children tumbled out into the sparkling landscape with whoops of delight, while the ranch hands set about checking on the cattle and repairing the damage from the storm. Tabitha was hanging laundry to dry in the kitchen of the main house when Thomas found her. "Have you given any more thought to your cousin's offer?" he asked without preamble. Tabitha turned, surprised by the directness of the question. "I have." And his face was carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in the set of his shoulders. "We're not going," she said simply. "This is our home now. Unless—" A sudden doubt assailed her. "Unless you'd prefer we did leave?" "No." The vehemence of his response startled them both. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Tabitha had come to recognize as a sign of agitation. "No," he repeated more calmly. "I don't want you to leave." Relief washed through her, followed by a tentative hope. "That's good, because the children would be heartbroken. They love it here." She hesitated, then added softly, "We all do." Thomas took a step closer, close enough that she could see the varied shades of brown in his eyes, the small scar above his left eyebrow that she'd often wondered about. "Tabitha!" The kitchen door banged open, and James burst in, his face alight with excitement. "Ma, Mr. Blackwell, you have to come see what we found in the old barn." The moment shattered. Thomas stepped back, his expression closing. "What is it, James?" "A litter of kittens. 4 of them, all different colors. Can we keep them, please?" Tabitha exchanged a glance with Thomas, who shrugged, the corner of his mouth lifting. "It's your decision, Tabitha. They're your children. They'd be the ranch's cats," she pointed out. "Catching mice in your barns." "True enough. Practical as well as pleasing, then." He nodded to James. "Lead the way, young man. Let's see these kittens of yours." As they followed James across the snowy yard, Tabitha found herself wishing they could return to that interrupted moment in the kitchen. What had Thomas been about to say? The days that followed were busy with Christmas preparations. Tabitha threw herself into making the holiday special for the children, their first Christmas without their father, but also their first at the ranch. She baked cookies and pies, made wreaths from pine boughs, and set the children to crafting simple decorations for the tree Thomas had the ranch hands bring in from the hills. The main house was transformed with greenery and ribbon, filling the rooms with the scent of pine and spice. Tabitha found herself humming carols as she worked, her heart lighter than it had been in months. The grief for William was still there, a dull ache rather than the sharp pain it had once been, but alongside it grew a new feeling, a tentative happiness, a cautious hope for the future. On Christmas Eve, Thomas joined them for a special supper at the cottage. Tabitha had prepared all the traditional dishes: roast turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce, mashed potatoes, and for dessert, mince pies and a plum pudding that had been soaking in brandy for weeks. The children were on their best behavior, excited about the celebration but mindful of their manners with Thomas present. After the meal, they gathered in the sitting room, where a small tree stood decorated with paper chains, dried berries, and candles. "Time for presents," announced Elizabeth, who had appointed herself the distributor of gifts. The children had made simple presents for each other, and for Tabitha, carved wooden animals from Samuel, knitted scarves from the twins, drawings from Henry and Lily. James presented his mother with a small jewelry box he'd crafted under Mr. Peterson's guidance. "It's beautiful, James," Tabitha exclaimed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "You've become quite the craftsman." James ducked his head, pleased. "Mr. Peterson taught me how to do the inlay pattern. And now," Thomas spoke up, reaching for a sack he'd brought with him, "I have something for each of you." The children watched with wide eyes as he distributed packages wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. For James, there was a fine leather saddlebag with his initials tooled into the flap. The twins received identical silver lockets on delicate chains. Samuel got a set of carving tools of his own, Henry a wooden train engine with cars that coupled together, and Lily a beautifully crafted doll with real porcelain face and hands. "These are too much," Tabitha protested quietly as the children exclaimed over their gifts. "You shouldn't have spent so much." "Let me do this, Tabitha," Thomas replied, equally soft. "It brings me joy to see them happy." Their eyes met over Lily's head as the little girl threw her arms around Thomas's neck in thanks. Something passed between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing for months. Tabitha looked away first, her heart pounding. "I have something for you as well," Thomas said, holding out a small package. though perhaps you'd prefer to open it later. Tabitha took the package, acutely aware of the children watching with interest. Thank you. I have something for you too. She retrieved a parcel from beneath the tree, a new scarf she had knitted in the evenings after the children were asleep, choosing the dark blue wool to match his eyes. Thomas accepted it with evident pleasure. You made this yourself? I did, Tabitha nodded. It gets cold riding the range in winter. He immediately unwrapped the scarf around his neck, the gesture so naturally affectionate that Tabitha felt her throat tighten with emotion. After the children had been tucked into bed, their new treasures carefully arranged where they could see them upon waking, Tabitha returned to the sitting room to find Thomas still there, stoking the fire. I thought you'd have gone back to the main house by now, she said, pausing in the doorway. I wanted to speak with you alone, he replied, straightening, and to see you open your gift. Tabitha moved to the chair opposite his, the small package still in her hand. You've already been so generous to us all. This is different, Thomas said, his voice low and serious. This is for you, Tabitha, not as my housekeeper, not as the children's mother. For you. With trembling fingers, Tabitha unwrapped the package, revealing a small velvet box. Inside nestled a ring, a simple gold band set with a single pearl, similar to the one in her mother's brooch, but larger, with a warm luster that caught the firelight. Thomas, she breathed, staring at the ring. I don't understand. He moved from his chair to kneel before her, taking her free hand in his. Tabitha Brooks, I know it hasn't been a year since you lost William. I know you have 6 children who depend on you. I know you came here out of necessity, not choice. Tabitha tried to speak, but he gently pressed a finger to her lips. Please, let me finish. Since you and the children came to the ranch, you've brought life back to this place, and to me. I'd forgotten what it was to have laughter in these rooms, to have someone care whether I ate properly or wore a warm enough coat. He took a deep breath. I'm not asking you to forget William. I would never ask that. But I'm hoping there might be room in your heart for me as well. Room for us to build a life together with all your children. Because I've come to love them, Tabitha, and I've come to love you. Tears filled Tabitha's eyes. Thomas, you don't have to answer now, he said quickly. Take all the time you need. The ring is yours whether you accept my proposal or not. I just wanted you to know how I feel, that when I look at you and your children, I don't see burdens. I see the family I thought I'd never have. Tabitha closed the ring box and set it carefully on the table beside her. Then, with both hands, she framed Thomas's face, feeling the roughness of his evening stubble beneath her palms. Thomas Blackwell, do you really think I need time to consider? When you've given us a home, security, kindness? When you've treated my children as if they were your own from the very beginning? Hope dawned in his eyes. Does that mean? It means yes. Tabitha smiled through her tears. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, we'll be your family. Thomas's arms came around her, pulling her close. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. When they drew apart, Tabitha rested her forehead against his, feeling a peace she hadn't known was possible after William's death. The children, she began. We'll tell them tomorrow, Thomas said. Together. It's Christmas, after all, a time for new beginnings. Tabitha thought of how the children had already come to love and respect Thomas, how naturally he had fitted into their lives. She had no doubt they would welcome him as a stepfather, especially James, who had found in Thomas a mentor and guide as he approached manhood. A new beginning, she agreed, the words feeling right. For all 7 of us. They were married on New Year's Day, 1875, in the main house at the ranch, with the children, the ranch hands, and a few friends from town in attendance. Tabitha wore a new dress of deep blue silk that Thomas had ordered from Santa Fe, with her mother's brooch pinned at her throat and Thomas's pearl ring on her finger. James gave his mother away, standing tall and solemn in his new suit, while the twins served as bridesmaids, scattering winter berries before Tabitha as she walked toward Thomas. Samuel, Henry, and Lily watched with shining eyes as their mother and the man who had saved them from destitution pledged their lives to each other. I, Thomas, take you, Tabitha, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. Thomas vowed. his voice steady and sure. I, Tabitha, take you, Thomas, to be my lawfully wedded husband, Tabitha repeated, her heart full to bursting. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. The minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Thomas kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. Mrs. Blackwell, he murmured against her lips. Mr. Blackwell, she returned, smiling up at him. Later, after the celebration had wound down and the guests had departed, Thomas and Tabitha stood on the veranda of the main house, their house, now watching the children playing in the yard with their new puppy, another of Thomas's Christmas surprises. Are you happy, Tabitha? Thomas asked, his arm around her waist. Tabitha leaned into his side, savoring the solid warmth of him. Happier than I ever thought I could be again, she answered honestly. And you? Any regrets about taking on a ready-made family of 7? Thomas chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her. None. Though I hope we might add to our brood eventually. Tabitha blushed, thinking of the wedding night to come. I would like that, she admitted. A child of our own, to join the others. Or children, Thomas suggested, dropping a kiss on the top of her head. I've grown rather fond of having a houseful. Looking at the scene before them, James teaching Samuel to throw a lasso, the twins setting up a tea party for their dolls on the porch steps, Henry and Lily rolling in the snow with the puppy, Tabitha felt a contentment that went bone deep. Who would have thought, she mused, that when you found me that day, saying no one wanted a woman with 6 children, that we'd end up here? I knew exactly what I wanted, Thomas replied, turning her to face him. All 7 of you. As he lowered his lips to hers once more, Tabitha silently thanked whatever fate or providence had brought this man into their lives, giving them a second chance at happiness, at family, at love. Over the years that followed, the Blackwell Ranch flourished, as did the family that called it home. Thomas legally adopted all 6 of Tabitha's children, giving them his name and treating them as his own in every way. James grew into a fine young man who eventually took over much of the ranch management, allowing Thomas to spend more time with the family. The twins became accomplished young ladies, equally at home managing the household accounts or helping with the spring roundup. Samuel's carpentry skills developed into a true talent, and he eventually opened a furniture shop in Tucumcari. Henry discovered a gift for breeding and training horses, while Lily, the baby of the family, grew into a spirited young woman with her mother's compassion and her stepfather's quiet strength. Thomas and Tabitha were blessed with 2 more children of their own, a son, William Thomas, born a year after their wedding, and a daughter, Caroline Rose, who arrived 2 years later. The older children welcomed their half-siblings with open hearts, the family bonds growing ever stronger with each passing year. Tucumcari grew from a small settlement into a proper town, and the Blackwell name became synonymous with fair dealing and generosity throughout the territory. Thomas served on the town council, while Tabitha established a scholarship fund for children who had lost parents, ensuring they would have the educational opportunities her own children enjoyed. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thomas surprised Tabitha with a trip back east to visit her family in Virginia, a journey that included stops in St. Louis to see her cousin and in Boston to introduce the children to Thomas's relatives. It was the first time many of them had traveled beyond New Mexico territory, an adventure that broadened their horizons and deepened their appreciation for the home they had built together. But perhaps the most meaningful celebration came on a quiet evening, just the 2 of them sitting on the veranda of the ranch house, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. Thomas had just returned from seeing James and his new bride settled in the cottage where Tabitha and her children had first lived on the ranch, now expanded and renovated for the next generation. Do you ever think about that day? Thomas asked, his hand finding hers as they sat side by side. The day I came to your homestead? Often, Tabitha admitted. I was at my lowest point, convinced no one would ever want a widow with 6 children. And I wanted all 7 of you. Thomas smiled, the lines around his eyes deeper now, but still crinkling in that way she loved. Best decision I ever made. For me too, Tabitha agreed, leaning her head on his shoulder. For me too. As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, They sat in comfortable silence, surrounded by the legacy they had built together: a thriving ranch, a loving family, and a love story that had begun with a desperate widow, 6 children, and a lonely rancher who had found in them the healing of his own grief and the fulfillment of his deepest hopes. In the years to come, the tale of Thomas and Tabitha Blackwell would be told throughout the New Mexico territory: how he had taken in a woman with 6 children when no one else would, how they had built one of the most successful ranches in the county, and how their love had created a dynasty that would shape the region for generations. But for Thomas and Tabitha, the greatest achievement was much simpler: the family they had forged together, bound not by blood alone but by choice, by commitment, and by a love that had seen beyond circumstance to the possibilities that lay waiting, like gold in the western hills, for those brave enough to claim them.